Hi, everybody. I'm coming at you from Orlando, Florida, where it's really sunny and I'm having a good time at a conference. But what I was thinking I would do is improve the video that I put out there yesterday, because I put a video out yesterday on 6 reasons to be a Christian. And I realized I misspoke in a couple of areas. And so without leaving that video up, I decided to take it down and to make some improvements to my video. And I have replaced it now with this one, which is entitled 7 Great Reasons to be a Christian. So I'm going to do a countdown from 7 to 1, and number 1 is the best reason to be a Christian. And so if you're considering the Christian faith, you're considering whether or not you should believe, you're wondering if it's evidence-based. It is. You're wondering if it's worth it. It is. Many good reasons to be a Christian, and I'm going to share those with you. And these also can speak to some reasons against being an atheist, because the atheist does not have these sorts of reasons. And so, yes, dokie dokie, 7 reasons are even better than 6. 7 good reasons. And this time I've got some better evidential support than I had yesterday. So number 7, benevolence. Since the beginning of Christianity, Christian believers, missionaries, charities, and churches have contributed much good to the world. You can go out and check that out. There's much evidence for that. The pictures I had posted there were from the Metropolitan Ministries. 6, life. Now here's a quote from the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops, which I felt was quite relevant to this conversation. Christians value life. From the earliest times, Christians sharply distinguished themselves from surrounding pagan cultures by rejecting abortion and infanticide. The earliest widely used documents of Christian teaching and practice after the New Testament in the 1st and 2nd centuries, the Didache, the teaching of the 12 apostles, and the letter of Barnabas condemned both practices, as did early regional and particular church councils. Also, St. Augustine and St. Thomas Aquinas soundly rejected those practices, again, the practices of abortion and infanticide. Now, while most people reject infanticide, with notable exceptions such as Peter Singer, the rejection of abortion is becoming more and more rare, sadly. Christianity values all life, no matter the age, size, or disability status. Life begins at conception. This is what many Christians believe. Now, I'm not claiming that all Christians believe this, but I feel that those who have really reached inside of them and considered what God said in many verses about the value of human life, that we must value humans and we must believe that life begins at conception. In fact, scientists know that life begins at conception. Here's what the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops have to say about that. Given the scientific fact that a human life begins at conception, the only moral norm needed to understand the Church's opposition to abortion is the principle that each and every human life has inherent dignity and thus must be treated with respect due to a human person. This is the foundation for the Church's social doctrine, including its teachings on war, the use of capital punishment, euthanasia, healthcare, poverty, and immigration. Conversely, to claim that some live human beings do not deserve respect or should not be treated as persons based on changeable factors such as age, condition, location, or lack of mental or physical abilities is to deny the very idea of inherent human rights. Such a claim undermines respect for the lives of many vulnerable people before and after birth. Christianity values all life. Now, here's some really discouraging and disappointing pieces of information. According to the Telegraph, 90% of pregnant women who know their child has Down syndrome in recent times have aborted their child. Between 2011 and 2015, a 54% reduction in live birth prevalence of children with Down syndrome due to abortions occurred. And this is from a study by DeGraff and colleagues in 2020. The estimation of the number of people with Down syndrome in Europe. This is from the European Journal of Human Genetics. In the United States, it's more dangerous to be an unborn child than to be a turtle egg or an eagle egg. It's very sad. If you harm a turtle egg or an eagle egg, you yourself might find yourself in prison, or you might find yourself with a hefty fine. However, if you harm a human fetus, You might be celebrated in some circles. Number 5, education. Did you know that Harvard, Yale, the University of Pennsylvania, Cornell, Columbia, Brown, Rutgers, the College of William and Mary, and Princeton were founded by clergy and people who were Baptists, Anglicans, Presbyterians, Reformed church members, the Church of England, Puritans, and more? In fact, the first universities around the 11th century evolved from Christian cathedral and monastic schools, which started around the 6th century. Number 4, healthcare. Here's a quote from the National Institute of Health, from the governmental website in the United States. In Roman times, the military and slave hospitals, which existed since the 1st century AD, were built for a specialized group and not for the public, and were therefore also not precursors of the modern hospital. It is to the Christians that one must turn for the origin of the modern hospital. Hospices, initially built to shelter pilgrims and messengers between various bishops, were under Christian control, developed into hospitals in the modern sense of the word. In Rome itself, the first hospital was built in the 4th century AD by a wealthy, penitent widow named Fabiola. In the early Middle Ages, between the 6th and 10th century, under the influence of Benedictine order, an infirmary became an established part of every monastery. You can see Christians really cared about the health care of all. They were the ones who were often collecting the babies who were exposed out in the streets, especially little female babies. Little female babies didn't have very many values in Roman times, and you can see much evidence of this. In fact, during Roman times, women were relegated to second-class status. I'm going to take a quick break, slide over here and say hi also to Gavin Hurleman. And great to see you guys, Doki Doki and Gavin. Hope you guys are having a wonderful day. I know Gavin is coming in here from sunny New Zealand. My colleagues here in this conference that I'm at have told me one of my colleagues' sisters lives in New Zealand, and she says it's fabulous there, absolutely fabulous. She says the nice thing about New Zealand that differentiates it from Australia is that in Australia, all those little animals want to eat you. And New Zealand apparently doesn't have a lot of animals that are predators, quite as many as Australia. He was saying something about bears and some other scary animals that are in Australia. So anyway, just thought I'd let you know that little tidbit there. So as we go, we're going to go now. Oops, my sharing screen just sort of erupted there. Hopefully I'm going to make sure you guys can see that. Okay, so we're back there on number 4. And so let's go to number 5. Or I'm sorry, number 3, we're counting down. Number 3 is women's rights. Now, you probably have noticed this, but women in the West enjoy equal rights, freedom, justice, and liberty. We have a lot of freedoms here in the United States, in Europe, in Australia, New Zealand, in the English-speaking world, and in the West, places like Canada, also places in South America. And one of the reasons for much of this is steeped in Christianity. As you might recall, during Jesus' time, women were considered second-class citizens. According to Josephus, their testimony mattered very little. However, Jesus changed all that. He changed the system. Women disciples traveled with Jesus. They were elevated by Jesus. They were at the foot of the cross. In fact, along with John, they were the only people at the foot of the cross who were followers of Jesus. Strangely enough, his apostles, his other male apostles, were all in hiding. But the women were there, right at the foot of the cross. You recall he talked to Mary right at the foot of the cross, the mother of Jesus, and the other women named Mary were there. Women were the first witnesses to the empty tomb. All 4 Gospels were kept. Imagine the most important discovery in the entire Bible being given to women. You can tell that Jesus loves women. And many times during his ministry, he elevated women. And he protected a woman when she was about to be stoned for adultery. He freed her. He said, he who is without sin, let him cast the first stone. He freed the woman. And other women were represented throughout the ministry. We have women like I mentioned, Mary Magdalene, Phoebe, Lydia, Priscilla, and Junia. Some of these were elevated to deacon status, or they were given the very important role of reading Paul's letters to the churches. But in contrast, Women in other countries, especially in some of the Arab countries, due to Sharia law, and in places like China and India, we see examples where women are relegated still to second-class citizenship. You might recall that just a couple of years ago, women were finally given the right to drive in Saudi Arabia. It's a real travesty. In many Arabian countries, women and men are separated in the universities, if they're even allowed to be educated. Of course, go back to Afghanistan. They don't want their women there to be educated for fear that the women might actually think for themselves and be able to operate independently. In many places, women are so undervalued that they're aborted as soon as it's found out within the womb that the baby is a woman. And you can see this played out when we look at percentages of the population in places like China and India. Now, in the United States, this percentage is about a 50-50 split. About half of every baby born is either a male or a female, and it works out really well for procreation that way. But you'll notice, very strangely, look over in India, right now, from the estimates I found, there's only about 48% females and about 52% males. 662.9 million people who live in India are female versus 717.1 males. Now, why is that? Selective abortion. Here's right here from a study I found, or from a newspaper article, I should say. Here's a quote: selective abortion in India could lead to 6.8 million fewer girls being born by 2030. A new study shows preference for a son is highest in north of country, okay, with Uttar Pradesh having the highest deficit in female births. Why is that? There's a lot of practices that make females much less valuable than males. For one, they feel the females can't work as males could in certain situations. Number two, when females get married, a lot of times the family that is being married into, the husband's family, expects a large dowry, and many lower income people in India cannot afford that. Now, this also plays out in China. For every one female born in China, 1.11 males are born. Okay, so we can see a big split. China has about 1.4 billion people, so this ends up being a quite large number. But even beyond this egregious practice of selective abortion is what we're seeing going on in places like Pakistan. Here's a quote from a human rights organization: violence against women and girls, including rape, so-called honor killings, acid attacks, domestic violence, and forced marriage, remains a serious problem. Pakistani activists estimate that there are about 1,000 honor killings every year. Now, what is forced marriage? A lot of times these women in places like India are married off, and also Pakistan, they're married off when they're very young. Some try to escape. I've seen numerous videos on this by human rights activists. Some women try to get away, 8 years old, suddenly being married to some 40-year-old person. It's rather sick when you think about it, but the practice is still quite prevalent in many parts of the world. Now let's get to the good stuff. Number two, founding sacrifice, a great reason to think about Christianity. Unlike other major religions that believe we can earn our way to heaven or nirvana, Christian scriptures make it clear that our salvation is based on the faith and works of Jesus. He earned our salvation through his sacrifice for us on Calvary. You'll recall that in the Muslim faith, they believe that Allah is sort of tracking your good acts versus your bad acts, and they hope that they'll end up in heaven. But of course, according to Muhammad, more females are occupying hell. In fact, it's dominated by females. Hell is, according to Muhammad. According to Nirvana and some of the beliefs of Buddhism and Hinduism, people are in a constant state of recycling. You're reincarnated. Now, the Bible explicitly says that reincarnation is not possible. It does not occur. But these two faiths believe that people are reincarnated into other life forms. In Hindu, it's into other life castes. If you did a bad job, you could be reincarnated into the Dalits or the untouchable caste. If you did a good job, you might end up being reincarnated into the Brahmin caste. It all depends on your works. They also believe that if you did a really horrible job, you might be reincarnated into an animal, like a cow. Recall a sacred cow in India. Okay, that's a belief that's prevalent in those systems. But a lot of times you might just wake up Your soul wakes up in the body of a cow with no rhyme or reason to it. There's no explanation because they believe that there's a passive ultimate force ruling the universe. They also believe it's within, it's immanent inside the universe. Christianity can be distinguished from that in that we believe that God is both transcendent, which is outside of the universe, and immanent and present and personal within the universe. Here's a little quote that you might want to remember. At Calvary, Jesus reconciled the Father's perfect mercy with his perfect justice and perfect love. He took on our sins. He forgave us for our sins, and all we have to do is accept his very generous offer of salvation. Here's from John 3:16, which is one of the most important verses in the Bible. For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whoever believes in him should not perish, but have everlasting life. The number one reason to believe in Christianity is it's the truth. Jesus' life, ministry, miracles, crucifixion, and resurrection are attested by multiple independent and ancient sources within the first 2 centuries of Christianity. In fact, within 150 years of Jesus' resurrection, we have 42 sources that give us attributions and information in support of the New Testament ministry, life, miracles, crucifixion, and resurrection of Jesus. These sources, even hostile sources, also point to the fact that the early Christians were often martyred for their beliefs. And we've got much external evidence pointing to a particular 3: James, Jesus' half-brother, Paul, and Peter. Now, Jesus' half-brother James once tried to stop his ministry. That's reported kind of embarrassingly so inside the Gospels. Paul, as reported in Acts and other places, arrested, jailed, and witnessed the stoning of Christians. In fact, he was there at the foot of St. Stephen when Stephen was being stoned in approval of this whole thing. Peter hid. In fact, after denying Jesus 3 times, just as Jesus predicted, the crow made a noise, just as Jesus predicted, and Peter went into hiding, embarrassingly enough. He was not even there to witness Jesus' crucifixion. He was hiding out because he was afraid he'd suffer the same fate. But then something beautiful happened, and it's reported very early in a Christian creed that even agnostics acknowledged was probably up to 5 years after Jesus resurrected. Okay, this very early creed called 1 Corinthians 15 talks about how Jesus appeared to Peter. Then he appeared to the 12. Then he appeared to James, Jesus' half-brother. Then he appeared to 500. And I might be mixing the order of the 500. It might be becoming right before James. So maybe it's 500, then James, then Paul. So he personally appeared. He appeared to people in groups. He appeared over a period of 40 days. He ate with his disciples. He made himself known that he wasn't just a spiritual form. He appeared in bodily form. You can't eat if you're appearing as a spirit. And they attested to that, and they spent their lives preaching for him despite horrific persecutions. In fact, they were singing in the prisons. They were thankful to be given the opportunity to witness for him. So it's really wonderful stuff that occurred. So I hope you've enjoyed this. I want to say hi to my friends here in the chat. Mr. Phil Fox, you're going to be really excited about something. Just stay here for 1 second. I got to tell you this before I get going because I'm at a conference right now. One of the things that was announced at this conference, it's in Orlando, on the very first day by the very first person, one of the first people to speak in the conference planning committee, is the fact that where we're located in Orlando, it mentioned all the Native Americans who are locals to this area for thousands of years. And one of the first things that the people in the conference did was to bless the land as land that had been held by those and taken care of by those early Native Americans for many years. And it was also given a blessings to those who are still with us today, the many people with us today who are of that tradition. And so I think you're going to find that pretty neat. In the educational settings that I'm in, what people are starting to really pay attention to are the Native Americans. And I'm seeing it play out here at this academic conference. I'm at the National Society for Experiential Education, in case you're wondering. And it's a conference that brings together educators from all around the world, primarily in the United States, but we do have a few from other countries. And the exciting thing is people are really paying a great attention to the needs and wants of traditionally marginalized people. And so we're doing that. So yeah, thank you. I also want to say thanks to Gary Priestley, Mr. Phil Fox, Doki Doki, all my good friends in here. I hope you guys have a wonderful day. Yeah, Gary says it's also a common feature in countries with native cultures as here in Australia. So yeah, we have to remember that. We have to remember we weren't the first on this land as the white Americans, the European Americans. There were people who came way before us. In fact, I just saw something that says there's some evidence that it could be 20,000 years ago that people were in the Americas. And so it's pretty fascinating. So you guys have a great day. I hope you like, subscribe, do come again. And just remember, whether you eat, drink, or whatever you do it all in the glory of God. Thank you.